My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverses, mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And the microscope sometimes shows us things that we choose to willfully ignore or think is relevant.
Beef Pork Ribs, we're going to be super microscopic today. Like, I don't know if there's such a thing as like a super microscope that goes super granular, but I perhaps in an attempt to like not talk about the movie itself, I have lots of like things to say about the movie or about the situation surrounding the movie.
I like it. I mean, I don't know. I'm torn between being a fan of not talking about the movie or only talking about the movie. I feel like there's almost enough to have like 2 full episodes on this movie. One on like the problems around the movie and one on the problems of the movie. Oh, did I just spoil that? I think the movie's problematic.
Yes. Well, today we're here to talk about Wonder Woman 1984, the second Wonder Woman movie that got its release over Christmas. And this is the first episode we've done. Honestly, I can't even remember. I want to say it was like maybe early December or maybe even like late November, since it's just been the two of us here. So I guess one fun thing we can kind of share, like, we don't really know many people who work in the biz or whatever. Every time we like share about a news story, it's been reported somewhere else. But one of our friends of the podcast, El Pacifico, he works in Vancouver at a place of business. I know that sounds sketchy. I'm trying to avoid secrets, but he works in a facility where a lot of celebrities come in to get physiotherapy. And he kind of shared with us in our little Facebook Messenger group that he ran into the actor who was on set playing Luke Skywalker in the season 2 finale of The Mandalorian. And he was able to ask the guy a few questions, and he basically confirmed that he wasn't told who he was playing. He was told he was playing a Jedi, and apparently they gave him like some kind of mask. I think it was like an alien mask to wear over his face. So he assumed he was just going to get motion captured with like somebody else, but they didn't tell him he was playing Luke Skywalker. And Mjolnir responded kind of saying the guy got a raw deal because he missed out on the knowledge that he was actually playing a famous character. And I don't know, Beef Fork Ribs, what do you think about that?
I mean, I definitely don't feel as strongly about it as Mjolnir does, but I'm also not an actor, so it would make sense. But there is something to it. I mean, it's especially because I don't know, I understand why it was done and the whole secrecy aspect of it. Although, to be fair, by that point in The Mandalorian, there weren't really that many options because it's like, okay, it's a Jedi that we know. It's either going to be an original character or one of like maybe 4 people. One of which it wasn't going to be because Ahsoka already said she wouldn't take care of him. So, there were limited options, and it is kind of a weird thing too. Like, especially if you think, from his point of view, he thinks he's coming into Star Wars playing a new Jedi or, somebody who's going to take care of the child and who might have an important role. And it turns out he's just doing a random cameo of another actor, which makes the not that there was much of a performance. He basically just stood there, but it also makes it kind of, disingenuous towards his performance, but also really, kind of crappy for him. He's thinking this is his break, his chance to be in Star Wars, his chance to maybe do something, add something to the universe, and oh no, we were just using you as a placeholder to put Mark Hamill's face.
Yeah, I mean, Star Wars has a bit of a history of keeping secrets. Like, very famously, the reveal that Darth Vader was Luke's father was kept a secret from everybody except for the director. And Mark Hamill was told the day they shot the scene. David Prowse, who was in the suit as Darth Vader, actually said the wrong line. Like, he read what was in the main script, like, I killed your father. And so there was only like 3 people: Irvin Kershner,
James
George
Earl
Lucas,
Jones
and,
must have known.
well, yeah, James Earl Jones found out afterwards, like, because they did all his voiceover like after they'd finished shooting. So there was only like, if you include James Earl Jones, 4 people who knew about the parentage reveal. So it's not totally, and unfortunately, like in today's world where we have all these internet news sites and people always looking for like every little tidbit of trivia. Like right now they're filming Spider-Man 3, and I see people posting set photos and making speculations about what it means for the movie based on what's visible in the set photo. So I don't fault Lucasfilm for keeping this a secret. I do feel a little bad for the actor, but I mean, he knew his face wasn't going to be shown anyway, so.
I know, but there is a distinct difference between, being told you're playing this Jedi, and like, even if it was afterwards, it still would have been a little bit crappy, but not as bad if you would have at least been told. But like, it just seems like, because that's the other thing. He was wearing a mask. No pictures were going to betray it. Like, would it have really hurt that much to let him know, hey, by the way, you're going to be Luke Skywalker? Like, keep a secret, sign this form and everything. Like, it doesn't seem like I feel like gag orders are pretty standard for this kind of thing. So, and he's, again, the guy, I don't know who it is, but like, unless he's a fairly famous actor, I don't know, I wouldn't mess up my chance of being in Star Wars more than once, perhaps. So like, I definitely wouldn't tell anybody.
Yeah, totally. So Al Pacifico, thanks for the story. Thanks for the inside scoop. And we'll see what happens with this actor in the future. As I said, we're talking about Wonder Woman 1984 today. So we've talked about Wonder Woman many times on the podcast before. We covered the first movie when it came out in 2017. But Beef Fork Ribs, you weren't on the show yet. So let's hear your secret origin segment when it comes to Wonder Woman.
Oh, you mean Wonder Woman the movies, or Wonder Woman as a character? Because that
as
is
a character,
like,
how are you? Well, yeah, okay. So like, I don't know. When he say like franchise, I mean like, how were you introduced to the character originally?
Yeah. Wonder Woman would be Justice League Unlimited. That's the first appearance of her that I was aware of.
What's wrong with people, Jean? Hostility's their answer to everything.
You're not one to talk of late.
What's that supposed to mean?
Diana, you and I have both been affected by our time among humans. It's important that we keep ourselves in check.
First of all, those thugs back there got exactly what they had coming. As did that band of mercenaries last week. And those creatures from the Decoran Nebula. They weren't misunderstood. They thought we were food.
You're right, Diana. None of it has anything to do with you.
And then, through Comic Historian and other kind of YouTube, I didn't read them, but I did follow a lot of YouTube videos on the Injustice series, in which she is prominently displayed as kind of a terrible person, although for slightly understandable reasons, which this movie seems to just completely ignore. And so, yeah, that's mostly it. I didn't read that many comics. I never watched the old Wonder Woman show. I think she, like, I've watched a few episodes of Young Justice that she may have been in. But that I don't have any particularly strong attachment to the character.
So when you say Justice League Unlimited, do you actually mean like the part where it's Justice League Unlimited, or do you mean like Justice League, like starting with when it was just 7?
The show Justice League Unlimited.
Because it was
So
Justice League for 2 seasons, and then it was Justice League Unlimited for 3 seasons.
yes, I did not watch Justice League. I didn't
Really?
watch Justice League Unlimited when it came out per se. I watched I watched a few episodes of it when it was unlimited, like here and there. I think like on holidays at a hotel, and then later on in life, I actually did watch the show online, like towards the end of high school. So I did not watch Justice League. I watched Justice League Unlimited.
Wow, impressive. And yeah, we might as well just, I think when we talked about Wonder Woman 2017 during the Memory Lane series, I remember you saying you weren't a huge fan of it.
I mean, it's one of those, like, I admit, yes, it was the best DC movie in recent history, but that wasn't holding it to a particularly high standard. I feel like I didn't dislike the movie structure too much. Like, everybody knows there are issues with it, but that wasn't terrible. There were a few things that bugged me in the movie and in the implications of it. Mainly that, like, in a World War I French society, people in a rural town were not really pissed at her for destroying their church. That seems a little off. Like, yes, she helped with the Germans, but ultimately she didn't help for that long because they ended up getting wiped out anyways. So, like, there were a lot of things I'm like, she's not really that heroic in that movie. And unfortunately, that's a trend that the new one kind of keeps up, is like, should I really be cheering for this person as a hero?
Okay, well that's a great jumping on board, because even though it wasn't super popular with you, the movie did do very well. It was one of the highest grossing movies of 2017, and it was critically praised. It was the one instance where DC had kind of beat Marvel to the punch in terms of having a female-led superhero movie. Even though technically there had been others before then, which were not really well done, like Elektra and Catwoman, and we don't have to talk about those here.
Yeah.
But because the movie was so successful, it was, pretty much within a few months of its original release, signed up for a sequel, and they confirmed the original director and the star Gal Gadot to return. So their movie was originally scheduled to come out on December 13th, 2019. Obviously, everyone who's listening to this would know the movie didn't actually get released until December 25th, 2020. And I feel like this is just going to be a conversation with every movie that comes out now, is that the movie was delayed several times. Yeah. Not all those delays were COVID-19 based. It was originally...
the last few were.
The last few were, yeah. Ironically, at a certain point, it was actually moved up to being in November 2019. So there was a point in history where we were actually going to get this movie like a month earlier than we originally hoped. And then from there, it was delayed till June 2020. And then, of course, once COVID-19 started, the movie was pushed back to an August release date. And then by later on, that got pushed back to an October release date. And then that got pushed back to December 25th. And everyone was really assuming that it would just get delayed again. But Warner Brothers did this whole thing where they decided to open it up in theaters on Christmas Day, and they used it as like the launching point for their new HBO Max simultaneous release schedule. And we've kind of talked about that already.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of curious in whether that last scene was a reshoot then, because that did kind of shoehorn the Christmas thing a little bit, because it's winter in the very last scene.
Yeah, they did do some reshoots, but they were in the summer of 2019. So after the movie had been pushed back to being made in... Actually, no, according to the director, she said that the movie was ready to be released in December 2019. Oh, but I guess that makes sense, because it was originally supposed to come out in December 2019. So maybe they did include the Christmas scene to try and, I don't know, make it more Christmassy.
Maybe.
I agree with you. It did feel like a reshoot, and that's
and one that fixed any issues.
Yeah, but what that means is that basically a lot of the footage in the film was filmed in the summer of 2018. So by the time we're watching it in late 2020, early 2021, that means that like what we're seeing is like over 2 years old in terms of like the filming. And granted, there's always like a kind of a year delay between footage you've seen a movie and its release. But did it feel, before we even talk about the actual movie, did it feel like the movie was like had sat on a shelf for a while?
I don't think so. Personally, I thought that like it felt like it was what it was supposed to be, which like I don't think there was anything particularly dated from it either. Like obviously, nothing made reference to COVID-19, but you wouldn't really expect a movie to do that anyway. So I didn't really feel like there was anything in particular that was out of place or kind of strange there. Maybe, and this is giving this movie a lot of credit I don't think it deserved, maybe they're tried to have kind of an emphasis around the idea of truth because of everything going on with fake news campaign. But that's the only thing I can think of.
There you have it. So, Beef Fork Ribs, give us the Blu-ray case description for Wonder Woman 1984.
I can save today, but you can save the world.
One day, you will become all that you dream of and more. And everything will be different. This world is not ready for all that you will do.
The world needs you.
Wonder Woman 1984, in theaters and streaming exclusively on HBO Max, December 25th, rated PG-13.
After World War I, and glossing over everything that happened in between World War I and 1984, Diana is still pining for Chris Pine's
Pine?
character. Because let's be honest, for the DC Captain America, played by Chris Pine, and suddenly a wishing stone shows up, which allows her to be with him, and she will not throw away her boyfriend in another person's body, and fights against a man who has become himself the wishing stone. And without spoilers, that's about... Actually, even with spoilers, that's about the plot of the movie.
Yeah, so we're going to talk non-spoilers in case you haven't seen the movie yet, and then we'll get into the spoiler verse towards it later on. This movie, on Rotten Tomatoes, when it was first released for critics to kind of review, it rated pretty positively. And then as time went on and more critics had access to the film, the tomato score kind of went lower and lower. So if you had to guess, Beef Fork Ribs, what would you say like the critic percentage score for this movie is?
Critic? I can't imagine it's anywhere... Okay, look. I can't imagine it's higher than 50%. I would put it in the mid-40s just because there were some technical aspects of it that were pretty good.
So it's 60%.
Oh,
it actually started out like fresh, like 90s, and it just kind of gradually went lower and lower. So it's right on the cusp of what Rotten Tomatoes considers rotten. Anything lower than 60% gets like the green rotten tomato as opposed to a red tomato.
I feel like it's gonna keep. I think it's gonna keep going down. Personally, I think not enough people have seen it.
Now, audience score. What would you say the audience have given this movie?
I would hope it's lower. For two reasons. One, because people do tend to look into movies a lot more nowadays and look at like what people have been criticizing and saying about it. Also, because I don't know, it just. There were a lot of issues that even like some of them I knew going into the movie, but then I watched it. I'm like, there's like there were a lot of things that I thought just didn't mesh or didn't make sense. I'm gonna say 50, mid 50s, a little lower.
74%.
Really?
And I think I fell into that camp because while I acknowledge there's problems with it, I overall still enjoyed it. So my overall,
really,
I don't know, approach to it is like, oh yeah, like I don't feel like I wasted my time watching this.
See, here's the thing. I feel like I wasted 50 minutes of the runtime watching. I don't know. I feel like there's a half of a movie there, and then a lot of things that just did not need to happen. But also, I think also I was expecting a lot from this movie I don't know why, because I know for a fact that, in Justice League, Diana's character was more or less the same as at the end of World War One, which baffles me completely. But like, I don't know. I was expecting better, and I was expecting real character development. And to be fair, there were some saving graces to the movie, so I guess I can see why audience score would be there. But I do think that critic scores should be potentially lower than that.
Now, I don't know if this is a COVID thing, but there hasn't been a single movie that's been released since the pandemic started that I've actually just been overall pleased with. Like, if I think of like Scoob and Tenet and New Mutants and Mulan, and even this, it's like they all have problems. And I'm like, is it so much just ask for just a good movie to come out? And I don't know
Bill
if
and
I'm
Ted
like,
was solid.
I guess, but it wasn't like it didn't like blow my socks off. And maybe I'm
Okay, but
just so
you
desperate
said
for
a decent movie. I think Bill and Ted was a decent movie.
All right, fine. I'll grant you that it was decent.
But no,
but
you're
I don't
right.
know. I don't know if it's because of the state of the world that we're just like we want like something really good to happen, and therefore it's like everything that is trying to be good is just not good enough.
I don't know. Like, I think if you compare Soul to other Pixar movies, it really doesn't stand up as being extraordinary. If you compare Wonder Woman to other DC movies, it's pretty much on par, maybe a little bit better than some of them. If you like Tenet, I mean, I haven't seen it, but from what I hear, it's just, Christopher Nolan too much.
Yep, that's
Which like, and yeah, I don't know. It has made me actually, one thing the pandemic has made me realize is, well, I really wish there were real streaming services that gave you older movies instead of like having to pay to rent them on Amazon Prime, which is mostly what it is, because I do find myself being like, I just want to watch this older movie because like it's good and I know it's good.
Well, as like we kind of mentioned, this movie had this brand new release strategy of being released simultaneously on HBO Max in the US and in theaters. And then the rest of the world, it was open in theaters where theaters were opened, and you could also digital premium rent it.
It would
I
have been
tried looking
cheaper to
for
go in theaters than to premium rent it, which I thought was kind of unfortunate, though I understand it.
Well, my parents have like a 4K TV, and they watched it in 4K, and they said it looked really good in 4K. So I'm like, well, I suppose if you have the equipment in your home to play it on a really high quality TV with good sound, then it's close to the theater experience. And if you're a couple watching it, you're basically like getting 2 tickets worth. But yeah, I had no choice. Like theaters weren't open in Ontario when it came out. But I tried looking for information about like how much money it would have made being available as a digital rental in Canada and other parts of the world, and I couldn't find any numbers, so I have no idea how successful it was. I did take a look at like the iTunes top 10 list for this past week, and it wasn't even in there. Like I scrolled through like the top 25 rentals and it didn't show up. So that's that tells you it's been a month since it's been out and it's not even the top 10 anymore.
Yeah, that's
in terms of box office, it has grossed $148 million worldwide. 37 million of that being made in Canada and the United States, where theaters have been open. And just to give you context, the movie cost $200 million to make.
Yeah.
And because of the shifting release date, they've had to pay for like multiple marketing campaigns. So they definitely lost money on this, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not. I look. I don't think the movie was so bad that I would have expected it to lose money. But given the current economy and the problem with COVID, yeah, I wasn't. Again, and maybe this is part of like our thing. Anything short of an excellent movie would have lost money, especially with that kind of a budget.
Yeah, and that's partially why I think they were afraid. It was a gamble to like even release it because, of course, there was no guarantee it would make its money back. I think you can almost say like Wonder Woman 84 is like a sacrificial lamb for Warner Brothers and the HBO Max streaming service, because they put out an article this past week saying that the number of subscribers the HBO Max has in the United States has gone up significantly in the last month. And the thinking is that the announcement of the Warner Brothers 2021 simultaneous release schedule and the fact that Wonder Woman was going to be on there at Christmas kind of led people to increasing like their desire to pay for HBO Max. So I have a number here. It says that in July 2020, about 2 months after HBO Max launched, they had just over 4 million subscribers. And as of this past week, they are now up to 17.2 million subscribers.
Wow.
So
yeah,
you could argue that like the success of Wonder Woman 84 is more people signing up for HBO Max.
which in the end is good for it.
Yeah, apparently they're like ahead. Like I guess AT&T, the parent company of Warner Brothers, had like these tracking goals for like how many subscribers they want to have for HBO Max by certain dates, and apparently they're above expectations right now.
Yeah.
Now they're still nowhere near as popular. Like I think Disney Plus has upwards of 80 million subscribers worldwide, and Netflix has 200 million subscribers worldwide. So in terms of the
Well, it also like comes to what's in the back catalog of HBO Max, right? Like how many older Warner Brothers things are there?
apparently there's like a whole Turner classic movies section with like really like classic films in there, but it's only available in the United States, so it's like it's not even worth us talking about. All I have to say, if Wonder Woman 1984 ends up losing money, arguably like the company will make up some of that money by having all these people pay for HBO Max, because unlike Mulan, you didn't have to pay a premium access price to like access Wonder Woman. If you just paid for HBO Max, the movie was there, which I still think is a very novel idea. The idea that you get like a movie that would just be freshly released in theaters is all of a sudden there for you to watch on the streaming service, even if it's only for a limited time.
But I mean, there's also, I think also one of the things is that because like that might have happened to Mulan had they not had the Mandalorian like massively jettisoning Disney Plus to the top. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't like Disney, thankfully for them, I guess, had something else to do. But if there hadn't been the Mandalorian to kind of hype up the service, there probably would have been some movie that did that somewhere.
Fair enough. So one of the people I follow on YouTube, she talked about her experience with this movie, and she kind of recalled a conversation she'd had with an editor at DC Comics, because I don't know, I guess she knows people who work at DC Comics, and they were talking about Wonder Woman as a character. And apparently even at the DC Comics offices, there's like kind of two camps of people when it comes to understanding the Wonder Woman character. Some people perceive her as like the ambassador of peace, who like comes across things in a non-violent way, and like, you know, it's all about the truth and representing freedom and, you know, non-violent things. Then there's other camp that really sees her as like the warrior princess, like the one who's ready to like, you know, fight for the sake of those who can't fight for themselves. And so different comic books that have been published over the years portray Wonder Woman in these kind of two different styles. And when you think about this movie in comparison to the original, you really do see how they've kind of, in a weird way, it's like they're paying homage to these different camps, because the way that Diana's portrayed and the way the movie plays out this time around is very different to the original. And so if you're a fan of Wonder Woman 2017 or the original, you might not enjoy this movie because it is a very different film.
I mean, somewhat. I feel like they tried to have it both ways in this movie, which is part of why there's kind of a thematic dissonance in how Diana acts in the movie, and how what she does and what she says aren't really lining up very well. And again, I think there was a basis for doing this. And again, this is one of my bigger gripes with the original movie, and especially her reappearing in Justice League, is like, okay, she was that upset about World War One, and then she lived through the rest of human history between World War One and the present, and was just chill with it. Like so many worse things, like even just World War Two, like a massive resurgence of chemical warfare, war atrocities, atomic weapons. How would you be okay with that? And then between World War II and modern day, the amount of like, crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocides that have happened in the world, how could she still have any hope for humanity if she had stayed at the level she was in at the end of World War I, right? And I think that also kind of is one of my gripes with this movie again, was that like, okay, she's in the 80s, she's more or less the same person, except for a change in personality that doesn't come from anything that seems to have happened. And she's still just pining for her Steve, but hasn't really developed a personality. She just feels a little bit different, and not even that different. I feel like she's still very much a lot more of the peace ambassador in this movie than she tends to be in other parts, but without taking it at heart, because the Justice League doesn't exist yet, so she can't really be that yet, because the whole merging of the worlds, Atlantis hasn't been revealed, her island is still closed off, there's no world to communicate with her for her to be an ambassador.
Yeah, I mean, you almost have to like pretend the other DCEU movies don't exist, because if you really try to make sense of it, like, it doesn't make sense. So I've kind of just given up. I'm treating this as like an Elseworlds. It's like, this is just a different universe where this is like one potential pathway from the original movie. Because hearing the director, her name is Patty Jenkins, for those who care.
She's a
basically
woman.
like,
this becomes relevant later on.
she seems to like totally discount, or she's not at all concerned or interested in like maintaining continuity with the other DCE movies that Wonder Woman's in, like Batman versus Superman or Justice League. She's totally just concerned with her own films. So there's lots of plot holes that kind of exist if you try to make sense of this movie fitting in between the original Wonder Woman and her appearance in BVS or Justice League.
Yeah, but then that opens up another problem that I have with this movie, with her portrayal, is that it's not, even if you look at the two images of Wonder Woman that exist in comics, there is a fundamental difference between this movie and those, which the other movie had less. It was less of a problem in the other movie because she was kind of newly arrived, but Wonder Woman isn't a Marvel character. And I don't know, there's a lot of debate, Marvel versus DC, but I think we've talked about like kind of the fundamental difference. Marvel characters are humans with super gifts, and DC characters are superhumans living among humans. And Diana, like, there's some exceptions and some tweaks to it, but Diana and Wonder Woman and Superman are definitely fit 100% in that category. They are superior beings who lord over other people, like, and especially in the Injustice series, but like even just generally, like Wonder Woman's secret identity plot line, everything that has to do with her having a secret identity just doesn't make any sense to me. And not just in comparison to the comic, but even just as who she is. Why does she have a secret identity? She's Wonder Woman. She's Diana. She's Queen of the Amazons. She doesn't care if people know about who she is or what she does. Why should she? Like, that isn't part of who I've ever really seen Wonder Woman in comics or in other series try to like have a Clark Kent to her Wonder Woman. Like, she's always just been herself.
That's them paying homage to the 70s series, which took a lot of inspiration from like the more classic Wonder Woman comics of the 40s, where everyone had to have a secret identity. So and also, like, I've heard people like say that this movie, it harkens back to like the Christopher Reeve, Richard Donner Superman movie in terms of the feel.
Not sure that's the thing you want to harken back to necessarily, but okay.
Well, there is like a kind of earnest quality. I've heard people describe it as cheesy.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't think this movie had that earnest quality at all. Like, yeah, well, that's not true. Wonder Woman in this movie doesn't have that earnest quality.
Now, you kind of alluded to this movie being very long. It is like 2.5 hours long, and I think when we get to spoilers, we can talk about what should have been taken out, because it does feel too long, and there is too much going on, and there are too many characters.
Actually, I think that is the one thing I didn't have a problem with, was its runtime.
Really?
Yeah, I like, I can acknowledge there's definitely some things that could have and probably should have been eliminated, but I don't think there's a lot of things that should have been eliminated necessarily, and those that would have should have been replaced by something else. I don't necessarily have a problem with the runtime if you kept the kind of same structure there was to this movie, because also it did feel like there were some things missing from it.
Interesting. Well, this is how I feel about this movie. I feel it's a lot like Batman Returns to me.
Okay.
And this is what I mean by that. In
watched that
Batman
recently.
Returns, Tim Burton did not want to do a sequel. Like, he does not like doing sequels. So the way that Warner Brothers was able to convince Tim Burton to do Batman Returns is they said, well, what if it was a Tim Burton movie instead of a Batman movie? And what that was enough to get him interested, because he basically got complete creative control over Batman Returns. And so the movie Batman Returns is a Tim Burton film. It has his style all over it. It's totally like he got whatever he wanted. And the end result is something that some people really like and some people really dislike. And some people love the fact that it's so different from the comics, and some people hate how different it is from the comics. And this is a similar situation. Patty Jenkins, in an effort to kind of, for Warner Brothers wanting to like get her back to be the director, they kind of gave her complete creative control. So with the first film, she had producers that were associated with the other DCEU movies involved, and some of their stunt work people and some of the other production team
That explains
that
a
she
few
had to
other
kind
things.
of work with. But in this case, she got total creative control. She actually she co-wrote the script for this movie. So this movie has Patty Jenkins' kind of signature all over it. She's a producer of the movie herself. She wrote it, she directed it. And I think you would think Warner Brothers would learn their lesson. They had the same problem they had back in the early 90s with Tim Burton. They've now repeated with Patty Jenkins, kind of giving a director too much creative control and not letting them be in an environment with healthy conflict.
But difference.
Because
Tim Burton has done a lot of love him or hate him, was very successful and has been very successful. I don't know that she's there yet. Like, there is a difference there. You know what I mean? Like, I guess Tim Burton was still fairly early in his career at that point. So I guess
he really only done like Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands before.
Yeah, but both of those were cult classics. Like, even at the time, had a pretty good, like, because Beetlejuice, I feel, more than some other cult classics, like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, there were immediate fans of it. Like, it built up more afterwards, but, like, and Edward Scissorhands definitely was a hit, right? Even though it kind of became more of a cult classic later on, but it was a hit. Wonder Woman was a hit, but, like, mostly because it was being compared to the rest of the DC movies that came around that time that were all kind of terrible.
So do you see the comparison I'm making, though?
Oh yeah, I see it, and I again think there's issues with why that is true, makes some of the issues with the movie worse, but also does actually, I think, explain a few things, especially in the way that the stunt and fight choreographies in this movie did feel very different. And
there's
kind
not
of
a lot
bad.
of action, like, and I think that, like, in terms of this portraying Wonder Woman more as like the kind of non-violent peacekeeper, there really isn't a lot of action in this movie considering how long it is.
No, but there's a weird, there's a lot of obvious wire work in this movie, and it's kind of weird. Diana seems to have the power to make friction disappear in quite a few of the action scenes. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and some people think that's part of the callback to the Christopher Reeve Supermans, is like this, like this is what superhero movies were like in the 80s kind of thing, which I don't think works, unfortunately.
Yeah, especially because, like, we have gone a really long way from the way that action looked in the 80s, and it's mostly positive. And it doesn't look super fake, which some of the effects in some of those action scenes definitely did have that. And I guess if you're going with the argument, like, it was set in the 80s, so it's supposed to be more 80s style, but the problem is, if it was, a lot more people would be gunned down violently, and because that's what action in the 80s was like, and there definitely isn't that. So it's kind of like a lot of things in this movie that feels unfocused.
Yeah, and if you're a huge fan of Wonder Woman comics, you might have a hard time with this movie because there are comic book characters in the film that are totally not at all like they are in the comics. Again, like
Yeah.
Batman Returns.
Yeah, and well, I mean, yeah, but Batman Returns. Okay, the Penguin, I'll admit, is terrible in it, but Catwoman wasn't horrible. Like, Selena Kyle worked within the confines of that movie, and like a lot of people do admit that, like, you know, the scene where she and Michelle Pfeiffer and Michael Keaton are dancing together and kind of like revealing who they are weirdly is really good, and both these people are very good portrayal of those characters. But yeah, I'll admit Danny DeVito's Penguin is very, very different from Penguin in the comic and doesn't really work in any way, shape, or form except as a character in a Tim Burton movie.
Right. Now, when Wonder Woman came out 4 years ago, it was obviously drawing comparison to Captain America, the First Avenger, because it was about a world war and it was a period piece and what
There
have
was a
you.
person called Steve who sacrificed himself in an airplane.
Yeah, okay. So in my mind, this film as a sequel kind of has the same, I guess you would say, problem that the Captain America series had to do, is that they basically, by relocating to a different time period, you basically have to change the entire supporting cast and the setting. And so it almost feels like a totally different franchise. So when you get to Winter Soldier, it does feel like a very different movie from the first Avenger.
Yes, but at least Marvel had other movies in between which introduced that cast, whereas DC didn't really have that. I mean, they could have, but they didn't.
Yeah, they chose to, and I think that's the problem that Wonder Woman 84 comes up against, is that it really doesn't feel like a sequel to the original, because Gal Gadot, and they find a way for Steve Trevor to come back. They're really the only like
they could have
returning
just easily had a reference to the Wayne Enterprises, right? Because Maxwell Lord goes to talk to like all these super rich people. Why wasn't not Bruce, because he wouldn't have been in charge, but why wasn't Thomas Wayne in the movie? Like, just easy, put him in there. Be like, yes, remember, this is the same universe. And look, Thomas Wayne is basically the richest man in the well. Bruce Wayne is the richest man in the world. Thomas Wayne couldn't have been that far behind.
But even like choosing to do it as another period piece, like you said, like with Winter Soldier, they were able to like introduce some characters had already been in other movies, and so it felt like we were not necessarily walking into a whole new movie because there were some other established characters. But with this, they chose to do another period piece, and essentially introducing a whole new cast of characters again. So, and especially when you consider how Wonder Woman's more the warrior in the first one and more the peacekeeper in this one, it really doesn't feel like a part of the same franchise at all.
Yeah, and especially her still being her becoming the peacekeeper later on. Again, thematically for the character makes no sense, but it was, yeah. But I don't think that was the movie's biggest problem, because I actually think the new characters did better than the old ones.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
Like, in as much as Maxwell Lord is completely different from the comics.
Oh yeah,
I thought he was the best part of the movie.
Yeah, he's like Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman to me. It's like, yeah, this is not what's in the comics, but I'm still enjoying what I'm seeing here.
And this works. And Barbara, there was something there. Yeah, there was something there. And I don't think the casting was amazing for what they were trying to do, but still, there was a possibility. And yeah, when we'll get to spoilers and what we take out and maybe add on, I think there's definitely something to explore there.
Yeah, we're saying a lot of bad stuff, but things I did like, it is very visually pleasing, like lots of great color, a lot of great, like it looks really nice to look at.
True.
they do the first movie, Diana's doing the whole fish out of water story. So Steve is having to like explain to her what all these things are. And they kind of do a fun reversal of that here, where all of a sudden Steve's the one fish out of water, and Diana's having to explain.
Sure, it plays out very differently.
Yeah, but it's still fun.
Is it though?
I thought it was fun.
Okay, it's fun, but I don't think it should be in the movie because it is very much just Chris Pine being Chris Pine rather than Steve. Just Chris. I don't know. It does feel like Chris Pine is just pretending he doesn't know what anything is.
Fair enough. Yeah, I want to say at least one more positive thing before we just get into spoilers.
Maxwell Lord was a tremendous. His character motivations actually did make sense. They got a little skewed, but Pedro, last name
Pascal,
I think, like, I heard people saying that they didn't like him in the movie. I'm like, okay, if you didn't like what his interpretation of Maxwell Lord is, fair enough, but I thought he played the role that was written in the story very well. He was acting his heart out. He was putting a lot of emotion and a lot of very, like, I believe that character. He was very sympathetic to me, and he worked very much so. And, there were some fun 80s Easter eggs that were in there, and I'm trying to think of another positive.
Well, no, I think the biggest compliment I can give this movie is that, yes, there are plot holes. There are things that don't make sense. But while I was watching the movie, it didn't take me out of the experience. Like afterwards, as soon as I sat down to think about it, I'm like, oh yeah, that doesn't add up. And oh, that's kind of problematic. And oh, that's not good. But it didn't take me out of the experience while I was watching it. And that for me is the big deciding factor. The original Star Wars has lots of plot holes, but the movie is constructed in a way that you're not thinking about them. You're engaged in the story. And to me, Wonder Woman 1984 was able to do that. It will probably be a lot less enjoyable upon rewatch.
Yeah, I will mostly agree with that. And definitely agree. I probably would not rewatch that movie. I might rewatch some of the scenes, but probably not to see how great they were.
So we're going to go inside the spoilerverse here. If you have not seen Wonder Woman 1984, maybe this hasn't been very convincing. I think it's still available for digital download. So there'll be a time code in the description where you can skip around the spoilers if you want to hear our final thoughts. So yeah, I don't think Cheetah should have actually been in the movie. Like they should have had Barbara Minerva in the movie and then like set her up to be a villain later on.
Yes, I agree. They should have done that, and they should have actually worked her relationship with Diana more, so that it was like, it did seem like her resentment did seem to come out of nowhere. She's like, oh, you're pretty and you have everything, even though Diana had been nothing but nice to her. And I mean, Mjolnir kind of pointed this out, but there was just some really weird lesbian vibes going down between them that almost made it seem like she was in a tiff because Steve came back, and that's why she was upset, even though the movie clearly wasn't going for that. It was just going for, no, she wants to stay powerful and therefore doesn't want the wishes to go away. But
well, I was like, here we go. It's another Jim Carrey Riddler or Jamie Foxx Electro. I'm like, do we really need to see this like character again? And like the Cheetah, I'm not super familiar with her character, but they've done like many different iterations of the Cheetah character, and none of them are this. And I'm like, why on earth, when you already have like several potential stories you could choose, you just decide to recycle something that's been in two other movies that weren't necessarily received well?
Yeah, and I think like her, as much as, you're right, it was very much Jim Carrey Riddler-ish. Her character, again, had her geekiness and clumsiness been more subtle and less slam on the nose, like from the very beginning. Like, honestly, I've never seen, like I said this to Mjolnir when we were watching it, like the last person I've seen have this level of like social weirdness is Mia at the beginning of Princess Diaries, where somebody literally sits on her because she's invisible to people. But like, short of somebody actually literally sitting on Minerva, that was pretty much on level with that.
Well, someone I watched on YouTube made a point of saying she's basically there so Wonder Woman has someone to fight. Because if you were to take the cheetah part out of the movie, that would take away 2 of the movie's fight scenes.
Yeah, but they weren't very good fight scenes, so... And it would only take out half of one of the fight scenes. So I don't think it's... I mean, I think it is a fair assessment, and she does exist as a fight, but then again, the movie could have been so much better and maybe actually had a real message if she was fighting moral quandaries. And honestly, to give her something to fight, Maxwell Lord was really good at randomly making people wish for things. He could have made people wish to be Superman to fight her or something, you know, to have the just grab one of his security guards, like, don't you wish you had the strength to fight her? Yeah, I do. And then you've got a fight scene, easy.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like, they could have like trimmed the movie down, like cut out a lot of the stuff, like have her play a minor or smaller role in the movie, because it just
Well,
me it like helped.
I think Minerva getting as much screen time as Minerva/Cheetah got, if it was building up something else that would pay off in a further movie, I think still would have worked, because the first couple of scenes they have together are good, and you know, it does add something, and it does, like, it doesn't make sense how much she resents her at the end because you haven't established their characters together. But like, even if they, you know, if we weren't seeing their first meeting at the beginning of the film and they just both been working at the Smithsonian together, you know?
All right, let's just talk about this body swap, because that's certainly the biggest issue people have.
Wait, I have just one thing that I just thought of, something that did take me out of the movie. At some point, they say that Maxwell visited the entire Smithsonian that day. I don't know how much smaller the Smithsonian was in the 80s, but that museum is several buildings. Like,
Yeah.
you can't visit all of it in one day. You can't even go through all of it in one day.
I mean, them just getting into a fighter jet and taking off, that just happened to be there. That
Yeah,
was like
full. Well,
gassed
we'll
up
talk
and,
about
like,
we'll talk about that when we're talking about Steve, maybe, because there were definitely some weird things about him. But yes, the body swap.
the body swap. It's like the thing that people went nuts about afterwards. And during the movie, admittedly, I was like, yeah, it's kind of weird how like they're totally fine with just essentially taking over this person's body, and they're like, no, like you know, she's so adamant. It's like, no, I have you back. I can't lose you. And she has no consideration at all for this man who's they've essentially, like, you know, stolen his life.
Yeah, and again, not again, but like, there was a weird dissonance in that. And I think part of it was, like, obviously because they wanted Chris Pine back in the movie, they made it be Chris Pine for almost the whole movie. It would have been a lot better and had more weight if they would have switched back and forth every once in a while, so we get the reminder, oh yeah, this is not actually Steve, you know? And that it was only, you know, when she's looking directly at him that it is. Because, yeah, you do have problems. Not just, I mean, and you also have the big issue that, like, the first thing they do is sleep together, even though this is not actually Steve. And like, and it's not even like she's just imagining it as him the whole time, because that would be a different thing. That would be kind of unintentional. But no, she knew this wasn't Steve's body. She still went to this guy's place and slept with him. And that just has so many, like, so many rape implications. And it's the kind of thing, and like, you know,
Yeah,
if it was a
YouTuber.
woman, a woman,
Exactly.
it would have never gone down. And I remember Mjolnir said this at least like 5 times during the movie. You'd think, with a female director and how much emphasis they were putting on the fact that this was a female-led project, that somebody should have said something about that.
Exactly. Yeah. Female YouTuber I follow made that point. She said the fact, if the roles were reversed, if this was a male character and they were like, you know, and there was a female character who had died and was being brought back this way, and they like had sex and all this, there would be a totally different narrative in the media. And like, thankfully, as time went on, people kind of picked up on that.
That's actually the first thing I saw about it, was a YouTuber who was talking about that.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, because that's like her moral kind of conflict of the movie is like, she, you know, she gets her wish of having, air quotes, Steve back, and the whole conflict is supposed to be built around her like making this sacrifice and giving up. And to me, it's like, you're supposed to be the hero. Like, this is not the right thing to do. And I think for the first time, it actually made me like dislike Captain America's finale and Endgame. I'm like, yeah, you chose the selfish thing that
Oh,
was like
definitely.
I was like,
and you messed up an entire timeline while doing it. But also, and again, there's two things to that. One is Steve should have been her conscience, and he should have been pushing her to renounce the wish, not because the world needs her and she needs her powers to win, but because it's the right thing to do. And like a few times he says, like, my time has passed, I am dead. Like, there was a little bit of that, and I actually, when I was talking about dissonance earlier, and I remember earlier this week, Mjolnir was watching this video that was talking about how, like, in the Transformers, Megan Fox's character is probably the best character, and the one who, what she says makes a lot of sense and is very kind of progressive, and she's a real character, but the way she's shot makes her just kind of a sex object. And there's a difference between what's being said and what's appearing. And I feel like this movie, it wasn't the way it was shot and what was being said, but it was kind of the message they were trying to get across about truth is what, succeeds. And the idea, I think, was supposed to, the truth is that Steve is in fact dead and she has to move on. And if that had been what the argument was being pushed for her to renounce her wish, it would make thematic sense and it would make her more of a hero. It's because it's like, she needs to let go of him because it's the right thing to do, not let go of him so she can get her powers back to beat the bad guy, because that's, again, selfish motivation. Like, I mean, yes, maybe she does feel a responsibility to stop this artifact from an evil god, which also plot that went nowhere. Who is this evil god? Why? So many problems with that. But like, the issue, the issue, Steve should have been pushing her to move on with her life, to, admit to the truth that he's dead. But in the end, she made the decision, and what he said was, the world needs you, and implying you with your powers that you're losing. And that's why she makes the decision, is because, well, I need my powers.
Well, I mean, I will credit the movie for what they were trying to do here, because you can kind of see what they were trying to go for. And there's this theme of truth versus lies. Like,
but
how are you going to build? Are you building your life upon lies or truth? Like, that is one of the questions that's being asked here. And all these characters in the movie who get access to like their wishes, like, they're totally fine to like kind of live in this, I guess you would say, fantasy where they're something they're not, and they're living like their dreams come true, and they have to all kind of confront the reality. It's like, am I going to build my life upon lies or the truth? And yes, maybe the way that she got to accepting her, the truth wasn't the best way, but at least she got there.
Okay, if I can play a devil's advocate just for a second here, though, I don't think Maxwell Lord was, like, yes, before the Wishing Stone, definitely building himself on lies, but since the Wishing Stone exists and he has control over it, and he has this power that's been given, that, like, yes, it was given by the god of lies, but he himself isn't directly creating lies in order to make things happen. Yes, he doesn't mention that to make a dream come true, he's going to take something, but at the same time, he's not really building his empire on lies. It is on shortcuts, and it is on, like, there's definitely problems with what he's doing, but as far as like the lie and truth thing, it doesn't really fit fully. And that's, again, a problem I have with this movie, is that I see look, don't get me wrong, I do see what they were doing, and there's something kind of there, and that's why there's a good basis for a movie here, but the execution is terrible, and it does not come across that way at all.
One of the things I liked about this Maxwell Lord, who is, again, nothing like he is in the comics, and that's a shame, because Pedro Pascal would have played a great comics accurate Maxwell Lord, but they make it clear that he is a Hispanic person in this movie who like changes his name to sound more English, And you can see that he's like dyed his hair blonde to again look more Caucasian and look more American. And so, yeah, at the beginning, he's quite literally trying to build himself, his life around the lie that he is something that he is not, or that this lie that in order to be successful in America, you have to be, you know, a blonde white person.
But is it really a lie?
Yes, of course. There's all kinds of people who are successful and
No,
are not.
Okay. In the 80s? Like,
Sure.
there's a
Look at
lot of,
Eddie
like,
Murphy.
yeah, Eddie Murphy's not Hispanic, and that is something, like, I'm not saying, again, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but, like, I don't think that was necessarily, like, I understand what's being done, and that's part of why those were kind of his motivation, but but the implication is also the American dream is a lie, and I don't know how much you want to put that into that movie where clearly it wasn't entirely. Like, again, I see what's being done and I don't disagree with it. I just feel like the execution is very poor for the theme, and
Oh, sure. And
that makes the movie feel really weird and disjointed.
yeah, I mean, you could argue that him like turning himself into this wishing machine is living out of a lie, because he's trying to be something he's not, and his body is like rejecting it. Like he's clearly getting sicker and sicker as it goes on, because his body's not designed to be hosting all this
Oh
power.
yeah, but he thought about it and he found a solution, and and I think there's an interpretation of that he knew this would happen, and he already had the situation figured out. It was just overwhelming him how quickly it was happening. I honestly, everything about Maxwell Lord in that movie I thought worked really well,
Yeah,
but
it's
did
kind of
not fit
unfortunate
with the theme.
he got across scot-free at the end.
Well, everybody got across scot-free in the end, and that's also a problem because I don't
Not Steve.
understand.
Steve's dead.
Well, yeah, okay, fine, but it wasn't his fault. But like, how like, we're talking about spoilers. Like the finale. I mean, beyond the obvious issue that if you're granting everybody's wish indiscriminately, there's going to be a lot of contradictory ones, and some that are going to destroy you, and some that are going to undo everything else. But also, and also the obvious plot point that not everybody's going to renounce their wish because my
We have
child is
free
dying in
will.
a hospital bed. I wish for him to get better. Yeah, I'm not going to renounce that wish. Like, no way. And so the reset, A, doesn't make sense that it is a reset, but B, also doesn't actually reset because you see there's still the effects of some of the wishes, but not others. Like, why did the nukes disappear out of the sky? Like, that the American nukes that were wished closer to Russia disappeared, that makes sense because the president renounced his wish. The Russian nukes were not the result of a wish.
Maybe it's like a chain reaction thing.
Yeah, but then everything should have been reset, and it should have been reset to when Maxwell turned into the wishing stone, and you should just have him in his office with the stone, having the memory of what happened and being like, oh, crap, and then like try to destroy it or hide it away.
Yeah,
But
and that's what I think this goes back to my Batman Returns comparison, is that if there had been other people involved and she didn't have so much creative control, they could have had more people looking at the script or being on set being like, hey, like, some of this doesn't add up, or some of this might be problematic.
yeah, yeah, I mean, obviously, for the script, definitely, and and I think it's a shame because, again, Pedro Pascal was great, and I liked his Maxwell lore, and yes, it wasn't comic accurate, and yes, he probably could have done it, but then they would have had to change everything about the script, just about, but, like, it was that aspect, like, just his storyline in the movie as is, other than the implications at the end, worked.
Now, say what you will about a lot of DC movies, but they always at least try to draw inspiration from different actual comic storylines about the characters. This is, again, like my Batman Returns comparison. This story is like nothing in Wonder Woman's. Like, Maxwell Lord isn't even generally related to Wonder Woman as a character. He's a DC character. And I think the movie suffers from not being like an actual adaptation of something related to Wonder Woman's story. It's kind of like this generic wishing monkey's paw storyline.
Yeah. No, it definitely suffers from that, and also, like, yeah, the fact that it is detached and that it does put Diana in a weird spot. And, you were talking about things that didn't need to be in the movie. I get it that the introduction shoehorned the very poorly executed theme, but since the theme was very poorly executed and it was kind of shoehorned, why did they, there was no real reason for that opening sequence.
With the
Also,
mascara. Yeah,
yeah,
totally unnecessary.
and like it also, she didn't lie. Like, it wasn't a lie and not living by the truth, and what the original hero did wasn't like living by the truth, because yeah, like, spoiler, it was a lie. She didn't die to save all the other Amazons. She actually survived. Like, again, doesn't it's completely disjointed. The moral doesn't make sense and doesn't actually fit anything.
But come on,
And
it was really cool to see Linda Carter.
yeah, sure, whatever. I don't. I figured out who it was, but I didn't know. But like, yeah, that was cool. But it also for the sake of a cameo, you undermined the already not very well placed theme of your movie.
Well, look, like even the Golden Eagle armor, like that's something from Kingdom Come, which is a comic set in like the future, and Wonder Woman shows up in that for like the big final fight. So it's the whole thing with like, oh, this was her armor and Diana somehow had it and whatever. Like that was all kind of made up for. I mean, it's the same reason they put Ben Affleck's Batman in the armor
Yeah,
from The
but
Dark Knight
it's
Returns.
if there's a difference between making up things or taking things from other parts and bringing them together in a movie, but then having that the reason why it's in the movie be coherent. Like, I don't care if they bring in things from other comics and give them a different spin. Well, I mean, I do care, but like, that's not inherently a problem. It's when you bring things into your movie and they don't make sense in universe for your movie.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, the only other really comics related thing is they found a way to kind of write the invisible jet into it.
Oh, yeah, that was what happened to the invisible jet. Spoilers, we can talk about some of the plot holes. That one didn't take me out of it completely, but like, how did they get back from Egypt? A, how did they get back from Egypt? B, how did they get back from Egypt so fast? They show up in Washington the next morning. How? She can't fly yet. She only learns how to fly at the end. Like,
Yeah, and even that was confusing. It's like, is she actually flying, or is she like floating, or is she gliding,
she's
or is
definitely
she
flying. Look, although to be fair, the special effects for flying, even in the jets, were terrible. The clouds were not moving fast enough, and it did not feel like they were flying at all. Like, yeah, no, she was definitely flying, even though they were trying to make it look like she was perhaps floating or jumping really high like Superman used to do. She was not. She was flying.
Yeah, it was.
Also, how did Steve know how to drive an airplane or a car? Like,
Yeah.
Anybody who's even remotely aware of what planes were like during World War One, it would there is no way he understood how to fly an 80s plane. Like, they are completely different creatures. Like, if at least he was a World War II pilot, you could have been like, he's really good at this and he kind of understood some of the things. But no, World War One planes have almost nothing to do with anything modern.
Now, one point that I did hear in a YouTube video that I thought was interesting is they said like it was beautiful to see Steve kind of interacting with the modern day, because this is, essentially because he sacrificed himself, he didn't get to live to see any of this, and all of within that universe, all of this was in a sense possible because of his sacrifice. So it was a cool thing to kind of see him experiencing all, and like the way Chris Pine played it did feel like he was like kind of like, oh, like, isn't this all amazing? Like he was really, I don't know, it was touching in a way.
Yeah, I'll admit that it was touching in a way, but I also don't think his sacrifice is what made that possible. Because, again, one of the problems with the first Wonder Woman movie is, did she actually change anything? Like, yeah, okay, that specific strand of chemical gas wasn't used in warfare during World War One. Would it have actually swayed what happened in World War One? Hard to tell. And if Germany had won World War One, World War Two might have not happened. And things might not have necessarily been worst off in the world. Like, because there's a difference between making an alternate reality historical thing where World War II ends with the Germans winning, and with the Nazi Party and Hitler ruling the world. That is a very, very different outcome than the Kaiser being in charge of all of Europe. Like, completely different. It's night and day. There's one that was objectively doing terrible things to people and creating an empire of fear, and the other one, like, there wasn't a significant difference between Germany and any other European country during World War One.
So, coming around to final thoughts, Wonder Woman 1984 is problematic.
Oof.
I think Gal
Understatement.
Gadot does a wonderful job portraying Wonder Woman, and this movie definitely leans more into the kind of peacekeeper, spirit of truth element of her character, which is admittedly nice to see. And even though the movie has a lot of plot holes, none of them really took me out of the experience while I was watching it. It's only, thinking about it afterwards and even having this conversation, I'm like, oh yeah, like things don't add up. They don't stick the landing.
I think it's a lesser version of the Suicide Squad. Very good characterization in a mess of a movie.
So if you're a fan of the first Wonder Woman, this movie feels so different that it's even hard to call it a sequel. You'll probably be let down. And if you didn't like the first Wonder Woman for whatever reason, you might enjoy this more. It's hard to say. For my part, I think I'll give it like 2.6 out of 4 bat cookies.
I wish it was a little worse so that it could fit into a so bad it's good category, but it's not there. But it could be pretty easily. I think I'll give it a 2.2. It is like there were good things in it, and talking about it, yeah, you're right. It was visually nice, and like, I wouldn't necessarily rewatch it, but if you turn your brain off to watch it, it wasn't horrible, and there were some very good performances in it.
So Wonder Woman 1984, I believe, is still available for digital rental, at least in Canada and the US, and it's not on HBO Max anymore. For those of you who have that, maybe it'll come back there. So I can't necessarily recommend go watch this movie. You need to see this movie since there's so much great content on streaming these days. Maybe this is one to just park for later on in life, especially with how expensive it is to digitally rent it.
Go watch the original Wonder Woman series or anything DC animated instead.
So normally we would go into the Batjar and look at our mail, but there isn't any.
It's sad. You'd think people would have nothing better to do than to write us letters. People, you have nothing better to do. Write us letters.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
So for the first time in forever, we are actually going to pull a topic out of the Bat Jar.
Oh, I'm excited.
You know, we've been kind of promoting Disney Plus the last couple of weeks with our episodes. And then before that, it was all Christmas related. And then before that, it was like Star Wars Holiday Special or Lego version. So I'm swirling it around here. Okay. Put the lid on. Animaniacs.
Oh, original or remake?
It just says Animaniacs. Like we could
I
talk
don't have Hulu, and I have not seen. I've seen like the Nostalgia Critics report on the new one, but nothing else.
Yeah, I think it's available on like Stack TV in Canada, so you got to like have that paid feature within Amazon Prime because Hulu does not exist here. But
okay,
there's clips of it on YouTube I've seen, but I think we'll probably focus more on the original.
I have the entire original on DVD.
Oh wow!
So I'm good for that.
Okay, wow. It's actually kind of funny because I was in a men's group on Thursday night, and one of the guys had never seen Animaniacs or Pinky and the Brain, so we were like showing him clips on YouTube, and particularly the good idea, bad idea.
Oh, solid segment.
Yeah. So there you go. Things are getting a little crazy around here next week. Come back to the Batshar Podcast next time when we talk about Animaniacs. And until then, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
Mwah! Good night, everybody.